Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 45 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam 4th Canto. Today we are starting chapter 21, and chapter 21 is titled Instructions by Maharaj Prithu. First of all, let us offer our prayers. Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Niravishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Deshatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyas cha kripa sindubhya eva cha, patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So there are 52 verses here. It's a bit longer chapter than average, although we have a few coming up which are longer, but anyway, 52 verses and 6 sections. First section is from verse 1 to verse 7, and we call that Maharaj Prithu enters the city. Second section, verse 8 to verse 10, Vidura asks to hear more about Prithu Maharaj. Third section, verse 11 to verse 14, preparing for Prithu Maharaj's fire sacrifice. Then section 4, verse 15 to verse 18, the physical appearance of Maharaj Prithu. Section 5, and it's a long one, section 5, verse 19 to verse 44. Prithu Maharaj instructs the assembly. And finally, the 6th section, verse 45 to verse 52, the assembly appreciates Prithu's instructions. Verse 1 to verse 7, Maharaj Prithu enters the city. Okay, so we'll just go through the verses, and then we'll come back and do the verses again with the purports as pretty much usual. Verse 1, the great sage Maitreya told Vidura, when the king entered his city, it was very beautifully decorated to receive him with pearls, flower garlands, beautiful cloth and golden gates, and the entire city was perfumed with highly fragrant incense. Verse 2, fragrant water distilled from sandalwood and aguru herb was sprinkled everywhere on the lanes, roads, and small parks throughout the city, and everywhere were decorations of unbroken fruits, flowers, wetted grains, varied minerals, and lamps, all presented as auspicious paraphernalia. Verse 3, at the street crossings there were bunches of fruits and flowers, as well as pillars of banana trees and betel nut branches. All these combined decorations everywhere looked very attractive. Verse 4, as the king entered the gate of the city, all the citizens received him with many auspicious articles like lamps, flowers, and yogurt. The king was also received by many beautiful unmarried girls whose bodies were bedecked with various ornaments, especially with earrings which collided with one another. Verse 5, when the king entered the palace, conch shells and kettle drums were sounded, priests chanted Vedic mantras, and professional reciters offered different prayers. But in spite of all the ceremony to welcome him, the king was not the least bit affected. Verse 6, both the important citizens and the common citizens welcomed the king very heartily, and he also bestowed upon them their desired blessings. Verse 7, King Prithu was greater than the greatest soul, and was therefore worshipable by everyone. He performed many glorious activities in ruling over the surface of the world, and was always magnanimous. After achieving such great success and a reputation which spread throughout the universe, he at last obtained the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Right, so here we go again. Verse 1. The great sage Maitreya told Vidura, when the king entered his city, it was very beautifully decorated to receive him, with pearls, flower garlands, beautiful cloth and golden gates, and the entire city was perfumed with highly fragrant incense. So there's a short purport here, and Prabhupada makes some nice points, very nice point. Real opulence is natural gifts, gold, silver, pearls, flowers, trees, silk, etc. Vedic civilization recommends these things as real opulence, as gifts of the Lord. Yes, of course, we know what it's like now. Oh, Krishna. It's really, there are very few people who have, substantial amounts of gold, jewelry, and so on like that, and beautiful living arrangements. Generally, it's all pretty low class. Anyway, let's continue. Such opulence changes the condition of the mind. The atmosphere is spiritualized. So Prithu Maharaja's kingdom was decorated with lots of these things. Verse 2, fragrant water distilled from sandalwood and a guru herb was sprinkled everywhere on the lanes, roads, and small parks throughout the city. And everywhere were decorations of unbroken fruits, flowers, wetted grains, varied minerals, and lamps, all presented as auspicious paraphernalia. Okay, verse 3. At the street crossings, there were bunches of fruits and flowers, as well as pillars of banana trees and betel nut branches. All these combined decorations everywhere looked very attractive. Verse 4. As the king entered the gate of the city, all the citizens received him with many auspicious articles like lamps, flowers, and yogurt. The king was also received by many beautiful unmarried girls, whose bodies were bedecked with various ornaments, especially with earrings which collided with one another. Right, okay, so we have a purport here. Prabhupada says, offerings of natural products like betel, banana, wheat, paddy, yogurt, vermilion scattered around, all auspicious for receiving a prominent guest. Guest, singular. A welcome offered by unmarried girls who are clean internally and externally, nicely dressed and ornamented is also auspicious. Kumari, or unmarried girls, untouched by any man, Such girls are auspicious also. Even today in Hindu society, Prabhupada says conservative families don't allow unmarried girls to mix with boys. And Prabhupada presents 3 reasons for that. Oh, not reasons, but just how they go through their lives. First of all, they're very carefully protected by their parents while unmarried. After marriage, they're protected by their young husbands. And when elderly, they're protected by their children. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, when thus protected, women as a class remain an always auspicious source of energy to man. Verse 5, when the king entered the palace, conch shells and kettle drums were sounded. Priests chanted Vedic mantras, and professional reciters offered different prayers. But in spite of all the ceremony to welcome him, the king was not the least bit affected. So there's a short, I think very short purport here. Let's have a look. Yeah, very, very short indeed. So this reception given to Maharaj Prithu was very opulent, but still Prithu did not become proud at all. So therefore it's said that great people who have power and opulence, they never become proud. Like a tree full of fruits and flowers doesn't stand erect, but bends down to show submissiveness. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, this is a sign of the wonderful character of great personalities. Verse 6, both the important citizens and the common citizens welcomed the Lord very heartily, and he also bestowed upon them their desired blessings. So, yes, Prabhupada makes some nice points here. A responsible king is always approachable by the citizens. Of course, generally, the citizens, the big ones, the important ones, just the regular ones, they all wanted to see him and get his blessings, and the king knew that. And whenever he met them, he would fulfill their desires, or pacify them, mitigate their grievances. So in such dealings, a responsible monarchy is better than a so-called democracy in which no one is responsible to mitigate grievances. And in such a democracy, the citizens, they can't even meet the head. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, in a responsible monarchy, the citizens had no grievances against the government, and even if they did, they could approach the king directly for immediate satisfaction. Verse 7, King Prithu was greater than the greatest soul, and was therefore worshipable by everyone. He performed many glorious activities in ruling over the surface of the world, and was always magnanimous. After achieving such great success and a reputation which spread throughout the universe, he at last obtained the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, yes, again, there's a more substantial purport here, somewhat more, that a responsible king or head of government, they have many responsibilities, but the most important is to perform various sacrifices as enjoined in the Vedic literatures. Next is to see the citizens are all performing their duties of their particular communities, means varnashram. So in other words, must see they do their varnashram duties. Plus, as exemplified by Prithu Maharaj, the king must develop the earth for production of maximum amount of food grains. So, right, there's a second paragraph here. Prabhupada explains there are three different types of great personalities. Some are positive great personalities, some comparative, and some superlative. But King Prithu exceeded all of them. So he is described as Mahatma. Mahatma, greater than the greatest. He was Kshatriya. And he did all those duties perfectly. Similarly, the other Varnas must do their duties. If they do at the end, they'll go back to Godhead. So that Parampadam Vaikuntha is only achieved by devotional service. The impersonal Brahman is also referred to as Parampadam. But if one is not attached to the Lord, one will fall down again to the material world. Yes. This is confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam 10-32. Arura Kritrena Parampadam Tata. If they don't surrender to the Lord, if they don't worship the Lord, then they fall back down. Patantyada. They fall back down onto the material level because they have no respect for the Lord. So Prabhupada continues, if you fly in space, you can go high. But unless you reach a planet where you can land, you have to turn around and come back to Earth sooner or later. So similarly, the impersonalists don't reach Vaikuntha, so they do come back here to Earth. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, although they may attain Brahmaloka or Satyaloka, all such planets are situated in the material world. So section number 2, Vidura asks to hear more about Prithu Maharaj, verse 8 to verse 10. Let's have a look here, yes. So let's read the verses. Verse 8. Sutta Goswami continued, O Shonaka, leader of the great sages, after hearing Maitreya speak about the various activities of King Prithu, the original king, who was fully qualified, glorified, and widely praised all over the world, so after that, Vidura, the great devotee, very submissively worshipped Maitreya Rishi and asked him the following question. 9. Vidura said, My dear Brahman Maitreya, it is very enlightening to understand that King Prithu was enthroned by the great sages and Brahmins. All the demigods presented him with innumerable gifts, and he also expanded his influence upon personally receiving strength from Lord Vishnu. Thus, he greatly developed the earth. 10. Prithu Maharaj was so great in his activities and magnanimous in his method of ruling that all the kings and demigods on the various planets still follow in his footsteps. Who is there who will not try to hear about his glorious activities? I wish to hear more and more about Prithu Maharaj because his activities are so pious and auspicious. Okay, so let's go back through the section. Verse 8, Sutta Goswami continued, O Shonaka, leader of the great sages, after hearing Maitreya speak about the various activities of King Prithu, the original king, who was fully qualified, glorified, and widely praised all over the world. Vidura, the great devotee, very submissively worshipped Maitreya Rishi and asked him the following question. So now there's no purport to verse 8, so we just go straight on to verse 9. Vidura said, "My dear Brahmin Maitreya, it is very enlightening to understand that King Prithu was enthroned by the great sages and Brahmins. All the demigods presented him with innumerable gifts, and he also expanded his influence upon personally receiving strength from Lord Vishnu. Thus, he greatly developed the earth." Right, so purport. So first thing, because Prithu was an empowered incarnation and a great devotee, all the demigods were pleased with him, and they all gave gifts to help him in his ruling. The great sages and saints also took part in that coronation. And Prithu, being blessed like this, he ruled and used the resources of the earth for the people. And as we'll see in the next verse, every executive head should follow in his footsteps in their ruling. So, regardless of whether the ruler is a king or president, or whether the government is monarchical or democratic, the process is so perfect that if it's followed, everyone will be happy. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, "Thus it'll be very easy for all to execute devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead." Verse 10, Prithu Maharaj was so great in his activities and magnanimous in his method of ruling that all the kings and demigods on the various planets still follow in his footsteps. Who is there who will not try to hear about his glorious activities? I wish to hear more and more about Prithu Maharaj because his activities are so pious and auspicious. So again, there's very short purport here. Prabhupada says, Vidura's purpose in hearing about Prithu repeatedly was to set an example for ordinary kings or heads of governments. They should hear about Prithu repeatedly. So Vidura's purpose in hearing about Prithu repeatedly was to set an example for the ordinary kings or heads of government. They should all hear about Prithu Maharaj to be able to rule faithfully for the peace and prosperity of the people in general. But today, Prabhupada says, unfortunately, now no one cares to hear about Prithu Maharaj or follow in his footsteps. And therefore no country is happy or spiritually progressive, although that is the aim of human life. Right, so section number 3, preparing for Prithu Maharaj's fire sacrifice, verse 11 to verse 14. Right, so let's have a look here. Yes, we will read the verses. Verse 11. Verse 11. The great saintly sage Maitreya told Vidura, "My dear Vidura, King Prithu lived in the tract of land between the two great rivers, Ganges and Yamuna. Because he was very opulent, it appeared that he was enjoying his destined fortune in order to diminish the results of his past pious activities." Verse 12. Maharaj Prithu was an unrivaled king and possessed the scepter for ruling all the 7 islands on the surface of the globe. No one could disobey his irrevocable orders, but the saintly persons, the Brahmins, and the descendants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Vaishnavas. Verse 13. Once upon a time, King Prithu initiated the performance of a very great sacrifice, in which great saintly sages, Brahmins, demigods from higher planetary systems, and great saintly kings known as Rajarshis, all assembled together. Interesting. 14. In that great assembly, Maharaj Prithu first of all worshipped all the respectable visitors according to their respective positions. After this, he stood up in the midst of the assembly, and it appeared that the full moon had arisen amongst the stars. Yes, okay, so back to verse 11. The great saintly sage Maitreya told Vidura, "My dear Vidura, King Prithu lived in the tract of land between the two great rivers Ganges and Yamuna. Because he was very opulent, it appeared that he was enjoying his destined fortune in order to diminish the results of his past pious activities." So, right, let's have a look here at the purport. It's fairly single paragraph, but still quite substantial. So Prabhupada makes an interesting point. It's kind of technical point, right in the beginning of the purport, that the terms pious and impious, they only apply in reference to the activities of ordinary living entities. Maharaj Prithu was an incarnation, Shaktivesh avatar, so he was not subject to the reactions of pious or impious activities. Yeah. Prithu was both an incarnation and a great devotee. Yeah. So a devotee is also not subject to the reactions from past deeds. Prabhupada refers to Brahma Samhita verse 54, Karmani nirdahati kintu cha bhakti bhajam, saying that for devotees the reactions to their previous activities are nullified by the Lord. The words, Prabhupada says, the words arabdam eva mean as if achieved by past deeds. But in Prithu's case, there was no question of this. So the word eva is used to indicate comparison to ordinary people. So anyway, in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, chapter 9, verse 11, avajananti mam mudha. And it means sometimes people misunderstand an incarnation to be an ordinary man. So, incarnations or devotees may pose as ordinary men, but they're never to be considered as such. And nor should an ordinary man who's not supported by Shastra be accepted as an incarnation or a devotee. So therefore, by evidence from Shastra, Srila Sanatana Goswami detected Lord Chaitanya to be an incarnation, although Lord Chaitanya never disclosed this. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, it is therefore generally recommended that the Acharya or Guru should not be accepted as an ordinary man. Verse 12, Maharaj Prithu was an unrivaled king and possessed the scepter for ruling all the 7 islands on the surface of the globe. No one could disobey his irrevocable orders but the saintly persons, the Brahmins, and the descendants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, means the Vaishnavas. So, all right, so now Srila Prabhupada gives a somewhat extensive purport. It's not a short one. Prabhupada, first of all, explains that Saptadvipa, refers to the 7 great islands or continents, as we know them: Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, South America, Australia, and Oceania. Oceania. Right. So, okay. So modern people think that during Vedic times, America and other places had not been discovered, but it's not a fact, because Prithu Maharaj ruled over the world thousands of years before so-called prehistoric time, and not only were the parts known, but they were ruled by the one king, King Prithu. However, the country he lived in must have been India, because verse 11 said he lived between the Ganges and the Yamuna, if you remember. So this is called Brahmavarta. And it consists of what in modern days are portions of Punjab and northern India. Yeah, so it's clear that the kings of India once ruled the world, and their culture was Vedic. So now there's a second paragraph, and a third, and a fourth, and even a short fifth paragraph. So let's go through. So, Srila Prabhupada says the word askalita indicates that the king's orders could not be disobeyed by anyone in the world. But, as was mentioned in the verse, such orders were never issued to control the saints, saintly people, the sages, or the descendants of Lord Vishnu, the Vaishnavas. So the Lord, known as Achyuta, and in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna addresses Krishna as such. Achyuta refers to one who doesn't fall down because he's not subject to the modes. When the living entity does fall down from his original position, he becomes Chuta, means he forgets his relationship with Achyuta. So we're parts and parcels of the Lord, but when we're influenced by the modes, we forget our relationship with the Lord, and we think in terms of species. When we come again to our original consciousness, we don't observe the bodily designations. This is there in Bhagavad Gita chapter 5, verse 18. Pandita Samadarshana. Hopefully you know that verse. Yeah, that the sage, situated in equal vision, sees with equal vision a cow, an elephant, a Brahmin, a dog-eater, and a dog. That is Pandita Samadarshana. Samadarshana means same vision, basically. So then, third paragraph, Prabhupada explains that, of course, material designations create differentiation in terms of caste, color, creed, nationality, etc. Different gotras, different families are distinctions in terms of the material body. But when we become Krishna conscious, we become members of the Achyuta Gotra, the descendants of the Lord Achyuta. So then we become transcendental to considerations of caste, creed, color, etc. So this means then, doesn't it, in the fourth paragraph, that Prithu Maharaj had no control over the Brahmin Kula, the learned scholars in the Vedic knowledge, nor over the Vaishnavas, who are above considerations even of Vedic knowledge. So therefore it's said, Prabhupada quotes, it's an important verse, actually. It's a really important verse. It's from Padma Purana. Let me just read the Sanskrit. It's really nice. Ache Vishnu Shila Dear Gurushu Naramatir Vaishnave Jati Buddhir. Vishnu Va Vaishnava Nam Kalimala Matane Padatir Tembu Buddhi. Shri Vishnu Namni Mantre Sakala Kalasha He Shabda Samanya Buddhir. Vishnu Salveshvareshe Tad Itra Samadir Yasya Va Narakisa. Which means, one who thinks the deity in the temple to be made of wood or stone, who thinks the spiritual master in the disciplic succession as an ordinary man, who thinks the Vaishnav in the Achyuta Gotra to belong to a certain caste or creed, or who thinks of Charanamrita or Ganges water as ordinary water, is taken to be a resident of hell. That's pretty powerful, isn't it? Already a resident of hell, if he or she thinks in these ways. So that was the fourth paragraph, devotees. Now there's a fifth paragraph, which is very small. Prabhupada makes the point that from the facts mentioned in this verse, it appears that the people in general should be controlled by a king until they become Vaishnavas or Brahmins, or Vaishnavas and Brahmins, who are not under anyone's control. Basically, just very basically, Brahman refers to one who knows Brahman, the impersonal feature of the Absolute Truth, and a Vaishnav is one who serves the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So let us continue verse 13. Once upon a time, King Prithu initiated the performance of a very great sacrifice, in which great saintly sages, Brahmins, demigods from higher planetary systems, and great saintly kings known as Rajarshis all assembled together. So the main point in this verse is that although Prithu lived in India between the Ganges and the Yamuna, the demigods also participated in the yajna that he performed. Indicates that the demigods used to come to this planet. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, similarly, great personalities like Arjuna, Yudhisthira, and many others used to visit higher planetary systems. Thus there was interplanetary communication via suitable airplanes and space vehicles. All right, so on to verse 14. In that great assembly, Maharaj Prithu first of all worshipped all the respectable visitors according to their respective positions. After this, he stood up in the midst of the assembly, and it appeared that the full moon had arisen amongst the stars. Yes, so there's a purport here, but it's fairly short. So the point is, according to the Vedic system, the reception of exalted guests, as Prithu did, is very important to receive guests, receive people, interact with people appropriately. First thing, what's the first thing to do? Wash their feet. And Prabhupada makes very interesting but extremely important point. When Maharaj Yudhisthira did his Rajasuya Yagya, Lord Krishna himself took charge of washing the feet of the visitors. Similarly, Prithu Maharaj arranged for proper receptions for the demigods, sages, and kings, and just everyone who came. Okay, so now section 4, the physical appearance of Maharaj Prithu, from verse 15 to verse 18. Right, so verse 15. King Prithu's body was tall and sturdy, and his complexion was fair. His arms were full and broad, and his eyes as bright as the rising sun. His nose was straight, his face very beautiful, and his personality grave. His teeth were set beautifully in his smiling face. Verse 16. The chest of Maharaj Prithu was very broad. His waist was very thick, and his abdomen, wrinkled by lines of skin, resembled in construction a leaf of a banyan tree. His navel was coiled and deep. His thighs were of a golden hue, and his instep was arched. If you know what is meant by instep, means when your foot sits on the ground, the inside part between sort of the joints of the toes and the heel, that's the instep. Verse 17, the black slick hair on his head was very fine and curly, and his neck, like a conch shell, was decorated with auspicious lines. He wore a very valuable dhoti, and there was a nice wrapper on the upper part of his body. Verse 18. As Maharaj Prithu was being initiated to perform the sacrifice, he had to leave aside his valuable dress, and therefore his natural bodily beauty was visible. It was very pleasing to see him put on a black deerskin and wear a ring of kusha grass on his finger, for this increased the natural beauty of his body. It appears that Maharaj Prithu observed all the regulative principles before he performed the sacrifice. All right, so back to verse 15. And it's the only verse with a purport, actually, but anyway, we'll read through again, because it's really not, the description of his appearance is just really nice. So verse 15, King Prithu's body was tall and sturdy, and his complexion was fair. His arms were full and broad, and his eyes as bright as the rising sun. His nose was straight, his face very beautiful, and his personality grave. His teeth were set beautifully in his smiling face. All right, so there's a purport here. There are 2 paragraphs, but they're not big paragraphs. It's a short purport, basically. So, Prabhupada makes an interesting point. Amongst the 4 social orders, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras, the Kshatriyas, both the men and the women, are generally very beautiful. Isn't that interesting? So as will become apparent from the following verses, which we just read actually, but we're going to read them again. Prithu Maharaj's body was attractive, but he also had auspicious signs in his body. And then so the second paragraph, it is said that the face is the index of the mind. The mental constitution is exhibited by facial features. In human society, animal society, or demigods, the bodily features are determined according to past deeds. And Prabhupada says this is proof of the transmigration of the soul through different material bodies. And now the remaining, what are there? Three verses have no purports, but let's just read them because such a nice description. The chest of Maharaj Prithu was very broad, his waist was very thick, and his abdomen, wrinkled by lines of skin, resembled in construction a leaf of a banyan tree. His navel was coiled and deep, his thighs were of a golden hue, and his instep was arched. Verse 17. The black, slick hair on his head was very fine and curly, and his neck, like a conch shell, was decorated with auspicious lines. He wore a very valuable dhoti, and there was a nice wrapper on the upper part of his body. Verse 18. As Maharaj Prithu was being initiated to perform the sacrifice, he had to leave aside his valuable dress, and therefore his natural bodily beauty was visible. It was very pleasing to see him put on a black deerskin and wear a ring of kusha grass on his finger, for this increased the natural beauty of his body. It appears that Maharaj Prithu observed all the regulative principles before he performed the sacrifice. Right, so, the next section is the fifth section, and it's from verse 19 to verse 44, and it's titled, Prithu Maharaj Instructs the Assembly. Verse 19, just to encourage the members of the assembly and to enhance their pleasure, King Prithu glanced over them with eyes that seemed like stars in a sky wet with dew. He then spoke to them in a great voice. Verse 20, Maharaj Prithu's speech was very beautiful, full of metaphorical language, clearly understandable and very pleasing to hear. His words were all grave and certain. It appears that when he spoke, he expressed his personal realization of the absolute truth in order to benefit all who were present. 21. King Prithu said, O gentle members of the assembly, may all good fortune be upon you. May all of you great souls who have come to attend this meeting kindly hear my prayer attentively. A person who is actually inquisitive must present his decision before an assembly of noble souls. Verse 22. King Prithu continued, by the grace of the Supreme Lord, I have been appointed the king of this planet, and I carry the scepter to rule the citizens, protect them from all danger, and give them employment according to their respective positions in the social order established by Vedic injunction. 23. Maharaj Prithu said, I think that upon the execution of my duties as king, I shall be able to achieve the desirable objectives described by experts in Vedic knowledge. This destination is certainly achieved by the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the seer of all destiny. Any king who does not teach his citizens about their respective duties in terms of varna and ashram, but who simply exacts tolls and taxes from them, is liable to suffer for the impious activities which have been performed by the citizens. In addition to such degradation, the king also loses his own fortune. 25. Prithu Maharaj continued, "Therefore, my dear citizens, for the welfare of your king after his death, you should execute your duties properly in terms of your positions of Varna and Ashram, and should always think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead within your hearts. By doing so, you will protect your own interests, and you will bestow mercy upon your king for his welfare after death." 26. I request all the pure-hearted demigods, forefathers, and saintly persons to support my proposal. For after death, the result of an action is equally shared by its doer, its director, and its supporter. 27. My dear respectable ladies and gentlemen, according to the authoritative statements of Shastra, there must be a supreme authority who's able to award the respective benefits of our present activities. Otherwise, why should there be persons who are unusually beautiful and powerful, both in this life and in the life after death? Verse 28. Well, this one's got a big purport. Look at there's 8 paragraphs. Krishna. Good? Very good. Verses 28 and 29. This is confirmed not only by the evidence of the Vedas, but also by the personal behavior of great personalities like Manu, Uttanapad, Dhruva, Priyavrata, and my grandfather Anga, as well as many other great personalities and ordinary living entities, exemplified by Maharaj Prahlad and Bali, all of whom were theists, believing in the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who carries a club. Verse 30. Although abominable persons like my father Vena, the grandson of death personified, are bewildered on the path of religion, all the great personalities, like those mentioned, agree that in this world the only bestower of the benedictions of religion, economic development, sense gratification, liberation, or elevation to the heavenly planets is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 31. By the inclination to serve the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, suffering humanity can immediately cleanse the dirt which is accumulated in their minds during innumerable baths. Okay. Like the Ganges water which emanates from the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord, such a process immediately cleanses the mind, and thus spiritual or Krishna consciousness gradually increases. 32. When a devotee takes shelter at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is completely cleansed of all misunderstanding or mental speculation, and he manifests renunciation. This is possible only when one is strengthened by practicing bhakti yoga. Once having taken shelter at the root of the lotus feet of the Lord, a devotee never comes back to this material existence, which is full of the threefold miseries. 33. Prithu Maharaj advised his citizens, engaging your minds, your words, your bodies, and the results of your occupational duties, and being always open-minded, you should all render devotional service to the Lord. According to your abilities and the occupations in which you're situated, you should engage your service at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead with full confidence and without reservation. Then you'll surely be successful in achieving the final objective in your lives. 34. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is transcendental and not contaminated by this material world. But although he's concentrated spirit soul without material variety, for the benefit of the conditioned soul, he nevertheless accepts different types of sacrifice performed with various material elements, rituals and mantras, and offered to the demigods under different names, according to the interests and purposes of the performers. Right, verse 35. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is all-pervading, but he's also manifested in different types of bodies, which arise from a combination of material nature, time, desires, and occupational duties. Thus, different types of consciousness develop, just as fire, which is always basically the same, blazes in different ways, according to the shape and dimensions of firewood. Verse 36. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the master and enjoyer of the results of all sacrifices, and he is the supreme spiritual master as well. All of you citizens on the surface of the globe who have a relationship with me and are worshipping him by dint of your occupational duties, are bestowing your mercy upon me. Therefore, O my citizens, I thank you. 37. The Brahmins and Vaishnavas are personally glorified by their characteristic powers of tolerance, penance, knowledge, and education. By dint of all these spiritual assets, Vaishnavas are more powerful than royalty. It is therefore advised that the princely order not exhibit its material prowess before these two communities and should avoid offending them. That's the Brahmins and the Vaishnavas. 38. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ancient, eternal Godhead, who is foremost amongst all great personalities, obtained the opulence of his staunch reputation, which purifies the entire universe, by worshipping the lotus feet of those Brahmins and Vaishnavas. 39. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is everlastingly independent and who exists in everyone's heart, is very pleased with those who follow in his footsteps and engage without reservation in the service of the descendants of Brahmins and Vaishnavas. For he is always dear to Brahmins and Vaishnavas, and they are always dear to him. Verse 40. By regular service to the Brahmins and Vaishnavas, one can clear the dirt from his heart, and thus enjoy supreme peace and liberation from material attachment, and be satisfied. In this world, there is no fruit of activity superior to serving the Brahmin class, for this can bring pleasure to the demigods, for whom the many sacrifices are recommended. Verse 41. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Ananta, eats through the fire sacrifices offered in the names of the different demigods, he does not take as much pleasure in eating through fire as he does in accepting offerings through the mouths of learned sages and devotees, for then he does not leave the association of devotees. 42. In Brahminical culture, a Brahmin's transcendental position is eternally maintained because the injunctions of the Vedas are accepted with faith, austerity, scriptural conclusions, full sense and mind control, and meditation. In this way, the real goal of life is illuminated, just as one's face is fully reflected in a clear mirror. Verse 43, O respectable personalities present here, I beg the blessings of all of you that I may perpetually carry on my crown the dust of the lotus feet of such Brahmins and Vaishnavas until the end of my life. He who can carry such dust on his head is very soon relieved of all the reactions which arise from sinful life, and eventually he develops all good and desirable qualities. 44. Whoever acquires the Brahminical qualifications, whose only wealth is good behavior, who is grateful, and who takes shelter of experienced persons, gets all the opulence of the world. I therefore wish that the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his associates be pleased with the Brahmin class, with the cows, and with me. Yes, so tomorrow we'll continue. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.